Hello, I'm...
Yeah, I know. You're the future me from another world married to Shinyco who was messing around with the vids I was making. I get it. Move on.
Fine. I'm here because there's a list you need to fix. Now get started.
Fine. Pokemon is a series that I've talked about to death, and in December, the overhyped top 5 Pokemon generations list was released, to negative reception. I'll admit it wasn't good, and I will admit, I plagiarized Logan. So today, to fix this, I will redo that list. Keep this in mind that I don't hate any of the generations, and for the first entry on this list, I still like this game despite my critiques. Also, since the original was long, I will keep these entries focused on innovations and the games, the main series that is. Also, I will bring up both positives and negatives. And lastly, this is strictly my opinion. If you disagree, leave a comment or make a video response. With that said, let us begin. Let's just get this over with. It's no surprise I put Generation 3 on this entry again, but I'm sure some of you are surprised that I put Generation 1 on the same entry. As I stated before, I treat Generations 3 and 1 on the same level now, because of similar positives and negatives. Since the shit hit the fan when I ran it on Gen 3, I shall start with that. Then I'll do Gen 1. Before I do, however, I want to give a brief history lesson to get you guys to try and see where I'm coming from. Whether or not that succeeds is subjective. Generation 2 was my first Pokemon game, and I loved it. And after I got that game, I got Ruby years later, and I played that almost instantly when I got it. I played the game for over 10 years, in between other Pokemon games, and occasionally going back to it. I want to bring this up because I wanted to just set this up. Is it the worst game I've ever played? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean it's a horrible game in comparison to other games I've played. It's just not my favorite in terms of other Pokemon generations. Let me get the negatives out of the way first. One of my issues with this is that I don't like the story that much, and I think the biggest reason why is because I feel like there are a lot of missed opportunities that Game Freak could have done to make me more interested in what's going on in the story. Maybe it's because I was spoiled by Gold and Silver, and I guess, to be fair, some parts of Generation 1, but there isn't much of a reason for why the two teams, them being Aqua and Magma, there isn't much of a reason for why they're doing this, aside from, hey, let's get Groudon and Kyogre because they have the KFB recipe. Speaking of which, this was another missed opportunity. Team Aqua and Magma are basically the same team, just change the legendary, element, and the color of them, and in Emerald's case a couple of members, and that's it. Not even Emerald fixed this, and it further proves how bland they are as villains. They're not that different from one another. Yeah, you could bring up tiny differences, but on the whole, they're almost the same. The reason I label this a missed opportunity is because in other generations, aka the last two, they've only had one team. So maybe with two different teams, you could have had something different, and they didn't. They're the same. This is jarring in Emerald, especially because what's really different about them, aside from what I've mentioned? Another missed opportunity, and I know I'm bringing this up again, is Norman. He's the first gym leader to be related to the main character, and it's not utilized well at all. All he does is give you the rival Wally. Guess what? Because of Wally, this person becomes overshadowed in the end. Hell, in the final battle with the first rival you got, this person doesn't even evolve their starter to their final stage. It's stuck at second. And Wally pretty much takes up the rival's space throughout the rest of the game. It's not even a developed character for that matter. And as for Norman, we don't see him again until the 5th gym after the first time we meet him and or Wally. This guy I find is easy as long as you have a fighting type with you, and after that we never see him again. I find this to be such a missed opportunity, because I feel like they could have done more with the concept. Yes, I've heard it's back to basics, but if you're going to bring up a concept and you don't do it well, I'm going to complain, because it's part of the story. Speaking of gym battles, okay, this one. I don't like the battle mechanics that much in this generation. You see, until Generation 4 and the physical special split, a lot of moves aren't useful in this generation depending on what you're going to fight. Before Generation 4, moves were labeled physical or special based on the type they were, such as fire being completely special based. So moves like Fire Punch, which makes no sense, are special moves. If you're attacking a Pokemon with good special defense and not physical defense and you use it, it's not going to do as much damage. And this complaint, yes, people, was in Gen 2 as well, so don't think I forgot about it, and Gen 1. And because of this, I find a lot of Pokemon to not be as useful in this generation because of this, such as Crawdon and Swampert, because their specialties are either with physicals, such as Dark types, and moves like Earthquake for Swampert, which I admit get a lot better in future generations after this because of this shitty thing that they introduced in the first 3 generations. Now let's get on to the Pokemon. Okay, let me get this out of the way. If a Pokemon has a crappy design, that doesn't make them bad. Generations 2 and 1 also had this, and I can freely acknowledge that. And Gen 3 is no different. Yes, some of them may have not great designs, but that doesn't mean they're bad. Grumpig is just a pig, but it's a friggin' awesome one, and I consider it better than Gardevoir. And Trapinch is just a weird whatever it is, but I still like it, and Flygon's an awesome evolution type. Even if they're not great designs, they're not bad. That's all I'll say, but my issue is that some of them aren't very memorable. If you were to ask me in a conversation what I remember about Pokemon Generation 3 in terms of what Pokemon were in it, I'd have a tough time unless you're talking about starters and legendaries and a couple of Pokemon I used, because I don't really remember using a lot of them. Remember what I said earlier in my story? That was because I never really played Pokemon as I do now in terms of strategy. I just got the best Pokemon, aka Swampert and Legendaries, and beat the game pretty much like that. And hell, I'd even trade them from one game to another. And I can't really do that nowadays for the original games because of that system, which still pisses me off, and it's not really a lot of fun to play. My point is, Gen 3 Pokemon aren't shit. None of them are, but some of them aren't very memorable. But when I get to use them, are they good? Absolutely. I'll get my quick thoughts on Fire Red and Leaf Green. I find this is a really lazy remake. If all you're going to do is add the 2 types, and the Sevi Islands, and or the Hoenn and Johto Pokemon, why should I play your game again? I mean, hell, I have Ruby and Sapphire for this again, or I can go back to the original. And with the Dark and Steel thing, there's already a few hacks that puts them into Red version. So, again, less of a reason. Maybe I was spoiled, to be fair, by Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but again, this is lazy. They only added a couple of things, and it wasn't that interesting. Yes, I understand why it was made, to get newer fans into the first generation. But for me, who grew up with this, and yeah, I realize why it was made, but doesn't mean I can't complain about it. If this is all they added, this is a joke. And again, battle system from the first 3 generations is still here. Couple lack of new features aside from stuff introduced in Ruby, this makes me want to play the original more. Oh, I'm so pissed off. I'm gonna get the positives out of the way. Yeah, Gen 3 has positives. Surprised, considering me. Well, whatever. I love the abilities and natures introduced. I feel it adds a lot more strategy to the game than Generations 1 and 2. Not to say they didn't have strategy, but this one adds more to it. Speaking of which, I love double battles, as I feel it adds more variety than battling one-on-one. And while I wish there could be more, I'll take it. I also love the battle frontier, because it adds more fun after the game, and thank you for making the battery not lose your save when it dies. Okay, this was a friggin' godsend. It's like, I guess for an analogy, I feel like the stuff here, if I were to compare it to anything, is the Great Deku Tree. Gens 1 and 2 is the original Deku Tree, and Gen 3 is like the Deku Tree sprout that would set the roots for the other generations to grow upon. So if Gen 3 did this so much, why is it so low? Because when replaying the games again, even Sapphire, which I've played Ruby for years, it just doesn't have that wow factor to it. I mean, hell, I'll replay Heart Gold, Soul Silver again, or even Heart Gold, for that matter, and I'll still find some wow factor to it, but because of the battle system, which I still find to be a huge issue, it doesn't help me replay the game. Sure, I'll play for a speed run, but it just doesn't have that wow factor to it. It's not a horrible game or a horrible generation, but I don't know. It's just kind of a weird feeling. Is the game horrible? No. I have issues with it, but it doesn't mean it's the worst game. I'll gladly play it. But it just has issues with me. And if I were to make a list of worst games, I wouldn't put this game on there. Okay, let's get on to Gen 1. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow fall under Zelda 1 syndrome in terms of gameplay. It hasn't aged that well in my opinion. Best example of this? Balancing! Just ask Mr. Alakazam and you'll see that it's more imbalanced than ball spawns that on the TF2 classes. It also doesn't help that the customization for your Pokemon stats and everything else is on the same level as Ultimate Tenkaichi's Mega Character function. The only way you can change your stats is in the expensive vitamins you get and sell it on City, as well as throughout the game, making each playthrough of this generation the same unless you get different Pokemon. And I know some people may expect me to bitch about Stadium, but again, I'm not talking about spin-offs. I'm only talking about the main game or remakes. In terms of a quick game, is it too bad? No, it's not that bad actually. I can find enjoyment out of it. My issue here, though, is that the games are way too short if you want more out of your game, because the metagame is so crap. It's the only thing you can do after the Elite Four. Get Mewtwo? Yes, that's all you can do, aside from get other Pokemon. Or look for the Mew glitch, but that depends on which version you're playing. Next, as for the Pokemon, well, it has the second highest amount in the franchise, since Gen 6 is not yet. It has some really silly designs. That doesn't mean it's bad, but the designs aren't really that good. Voltorb, anyone? Team Rocket's also very bland this generation. They don't really have much of a clear goal in comparison to Generation 2, which I find makes them forgettable in this gen for that reason. They just seem to be a generic take over the region team with nothing else unique. This one isn't that long, because in terms of advancements, there isn't that much here in terms of comparison to later generations. Now granted, again, I would still let's play the game, but in terms of positives, it pretty much started the Pokemon franchise. But the game hasn't aged that well at all, I find, which is why I combined both gens for one entry, minus my opening statement. And since I can't think of a witty joke, let's go on to number 3. I tried. I really did. But when I thought about it, while Generation 2 may be a good generation for me, I didn't like it in comparison to the last 2 entries on this list. As I stated before, Generation 2 is my first Pokemon game, and I feel it's aged to a decent effect. Managed to fix several issues that Gen 1 had, such as introducing Dark and Steel to combat Psychic types, even if the 2 types didn't have that many moves to use, as well as fixing the special stat Gen 1 had and split into special defenses and attack. I also love that you can go to Kanto after Elite 4 is beaten. Reason why I like it is because, well, it's shorter than the main game. A couple of innovations I mentioned are implemented in the Kanto region, which I do enjoy. I also really love Team Rocket in this game, as unlike Gen 1, their goal is to bring back Giovanni, which was a lot clearer of a goal than Gen 1. And I love the rival Silver, because while he may start off as a dick, he's a good challenge, and he also gets a good development throughout the entire game, which I love. And the Pokemon I also really like, even if there were only 100 introduced. Yes, it has bad designs and generic typing, but I don't hate the previous gens because the designs suck or are stupid. Not very memorable, yes, but not bad. This is so awesome! How could this be bad? Like Gen 1, Gen 2 has a shit battery that erases your save once it dies. That's a bad thing. This was one of the reasons Gen 2 was changed from its original entry, because whatever fun you may have can be lost instantly. Why? Because of that battery! Also, while the special stat was fixed up, battle system that I bitched about in the last entry, it's still there. It's an issue because if you're fighting a grass type with strong special defense like Meganium and you use Fire Punch on it, it'll do the same amount of damage as a flamethrower because it affects special defense and not normal defense. This is why I'll play Heart Gold Soul Silver over Gen 2. One more thing I want to mention, and this is something I noticed during the speedrun of Silver and Crystal. Despite my previous appraisal towards this generation, the game itself isn't too spectacular. Now that I'm grown up and learned how to develop strategies in these games, the game gets really boring. If you saw the speedrun, you noticed how quickly I sweep the game as compared to if I used other Pokemon. I did state this game has aged to a decent effect, and I still think that's true in terms of innovation. As for core gameplay, however, it's not too spectacular now that I'm older. Some may say, well, the remakes would be a breeze as well because of this, and to that, I had to say no. Listen, the stats are fixed up in Gen 4, and there's a lot more innovations and a lot more replay value in the remakes that make me keep going back to it as compared to Generation 2's Gold, Silver, and Crystal. It's not very memorable. You may be wondering, well, why didn't I make a third tie for it then? Because that would be effing stupid. And as I've stated before, I view Gen 1 and Gen 3 on the same level. Even if they are good generations, I feel like they're pretty much one and the same. Ignoring the strategy part, however, I did find this to be a decent generation over the previous two that I talked about. I guess, to be fair though, all of them were good gens, but... So, let's keep going. With previous generations, I labeled them as decent games that I would play through in the event of speedruns. This generation, as well as the number 1 entry, I would play again in a heartbeat outside of a speedrun. Generation 5, when I first saw it, I thought of it as a meh kind of generation, and while Black and White didn't impress me that much at first, Black and White 2 impressed me and made me appreciate this generation. Even though I'll still make pot shots at it because it's a goddamn joke. Even though I'm aware the original Black and White introduced some of the features I'm about to talk about, I'm not going to deny that. Triple N rotation battles, full use of 3D, at least in terms of a DS standards, animated Pokemon, and many more innovations that make me appreciate Generation 5. Just not the first Black and White because it was boring. Triple N rotation battles add a new type of strategy to the game that can make for some pretty fun multiplayer. Same goes for Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, but I already talked about that in the Gen 3 entry. Also, while I wish the sprites would do more than move from side to side, I do like the added animated sprites for the Pokemon. Speaking of which, I really like the Pokemon introduced this generation. 156 were introduced, and like before, they have good designs and types, and I like using them in the games. Some of them may have bad designs, but I still kind of like them. Though there are some unmemorable ones, but all generations have them. Such as the Boomerang Victini, as an example of a good Pokemon I like. I also really like how this generation has seasons. Even if it's a small point, I still like it. It also allows for even more Pokemon to be discovered. And hell, you can now have double battles with wild Pokemon. That's awesome. Pokemarts are now in Pokemon Centers. TMs now have infinite use. The Pokemon World Tournament, it's so awesome! Team Plasma is also really good, especially N, because he doesn't want to take over the world, unlike a surrogate father, and he goes through development in Gen 5. From the Prince of Team Plasma to providing help against Getsus, I feel like N is a good character because he's his most innocent rival so far. Because the stuff Team Plasma does is not his doing, and his influence inspired several members of Team Plasma to follow him in Black and White 2, creating the original Team Plasma and Neo Team Plasma. That's pretty sweet. And I've already talked about how awesome of a villain Colress is.
I agree.
Though I don't know like Getsus, but it's a really good generation, I find. Sure, it didn't introduce much in terms of Wi-Fi, but hey, we got random battles now, which is good. We got triple in rotation. It's pretty good. And improved experience points. So with my description of Generation 5, what could top... Okay, you guys know, let's just go to it. Surprised? Well, before this list, I would agree with you. But as shown from the previous entries, a lot of my opinions had changed. While on the surface, Generation 4 didn't make as many improvements as Gen 3, the improvements that were introduced I really like. Same with Gen 5, but there's a reason I like Gen 4 more, and you'll see why later. While I like that Gen 3 introduced abilities and natures which helped Pokemon develop more of a personality, Gen 4 introduced something that made me strategize with abilities and natures more. The physical special split. Before, moves were labeled special based on the Pokemon type, which was stupid, because certain moves involve using limbs, such as the elemental punches, were labeled special because of the stupid typing. This is another reason hacks of earlier gens have this physical special split, and this is why they're awesome. Why? Because this physical special move based on type I find to be really stupid! Sorry. As I said before, this is what made me strategize a lot more because of the split, and I love it for that. I also like the day and night system returns in this generation, because I love that in Generation 2. And I love that it's in this generation as well. And how it improves a little bit with better transitions, even if it's a small thing, I still kind of like it. We also got the global trade station, making it easier to grab Pokemon you couldn't get in the wild, just as long as you have it in your Pokedex. And while some offer ridiculous trades, like legendaries that are level 1, it doesn't turn me away from this feature. I also enjoy the party mode introduced in Platinum. Speaking of Pokemon, I really like the Pokemon introduced. Although it was 107, I like all the Pokemon in the series, with the exception of a couple, and even then, those two I don't like have use. I feel Gen 4 has some really good Pokemon that benefited a lot from the physical special split, such as Gallade, Empoleon, Swampert, thank you, and Luxray. Same goes for typing. I don't know why, but an Ice Ghost is kind of cool. And I like that this generation introduced evolutions of older generations of Pokemon. Gen 2 also had this, and I like that too. But Gen 4 has my favorite variety, and Gen 2 may have had some good evolutions of older Pokemon, but I don't really like a lot of them. The Pokemon that were shit before, like in Gen 2, now benefit immensely through evolution, such as Togekiss, Yanmega, and especially Weavile. Good God, I hated Sneasel before, now Weavile is beast. As for the villains, Team Galactic, I find them to be a good team in general, next to Team Rocket IMO. And I think the reason why is because of their goals, in comparison to Team Aqua and Magma. Their goal in this one is to recreate the world in their image by using Palkia and Diego's power, which I like. Although their goal is world domination, the way they do it is pretty unique, as they're recreating the world and then taking over, rather than dominate after getting their power. At least they're not doing this for money. I mean, who would do that? Why? Just why? But I think my favorite part is their leader, Cyrus. I don't know why I like him, but I think it's because of either his design or how he accomplishes his goals. Plus, his battle is a lot of fun because of the different types he uses in his fights against you. Speaking of characters, I like a lot of the characters in this generation as well. From the wise Rowan to the comic relief Barry, I couldn't really find a character I hate in this. I could probably find one if I tried hard enough, but on the surface I couldn't. As for the games, well, I considered Diamond to be fun, I loved Platinum, and I friggin' love Soul Silver, as the game added a lot more to the original game. Which is more than I can say for a Leafy Green game, though. Oh, Gen 3 I should also get on top. Yes, Gen 3's Fire Red and Leaf Green introduced wireless, but that has nothing to do with the inside of the game. It's barely utilized, and it's a multiplayer feature, but okay, if that was it, good job, good job. I still don't care about Gen 3's remakes. Sorry. Back on topic. Consider how a lot of the Pokemon this gen had evolutions for older Pokemon, most of this being Gen 2. It feels a lot more fun than playing the Game Boy games again. Though I would still play them for a speedrun with friends. I mean, you saw that already. I do recognize the game isn't perfect, like I said before. However, I do recognize this generation isn't perfect. Like I said before, this gen doesn't have as much innovation as compared to other generations before and after Gen 4. And there are a few more issues with the generation as well. Oh boy, I don't like the gym leaders this generation. Some of the newer Pokemon I don't like a lot. But despite this, I still like this generation, as not only did it fix the issues the earlier generations had, it introduced more evolutions to older Pokemon, has a good evil team, and has my favorite remake so far in this series. I'm the Mountie Chief, and I'm looking forward to Generation 6. There, it's done.
But why? Why did you say those things about Gen 3? All those improvements you listed? Well, before you hated it!
Simple. There was one list that made me realize my mistake on Generation 3.
What? But you talk too fast. You put legendaries on there that weren't legends. How could a list like that change you?
Because of the message at the end of that list. I said that because of the shit going on with my friend Logan at the time of that list, as people bitched at him for Gen 5. And I made that speech to tell them that each generation and Pokemon were special. And I completely forgot that speech when I did the original Generations list. I was completely ignorant to Gen 3, and I realized that. I lied to myself when making that list. I remembered the memories I had with that generation. It was good to me, and the treatment I gave to it was horrible. So I saw that list again, and I realized what I did wrong. Yes, it's flawed. Yes, I don't find the Pokemon that are memorable. But when I use them, they're friggin' awesome. Flygon helped my ass so much in Coliseum, and Swampert's my favorite starter in Pokemon. And yes, maybe it's boring after the Elite Four, but you know what? I still like the game despite its flaws. It was a big part of my childhood. Even if Fire Red and Leaf Green are lazy remakes I still find enjoyment out of it, because I enjoy Gen 1 to an extent. These games aren't bad, and games in that gen that are, mainly the spin-offs, don't change my opinion on that generation as a whole. Deoxys, Altaria, even Gardevoir I find to be good Pokemon despite their faults, because each and every Pokemon is designed for a reason and they all have a use. It depends on the trainer and how it's used. It's not the Pokemon's fault they aren't useful. It can be useful, but only if the trainer knows what they're doing with them. And if they can't, it's not the Pokemon's fault. Even Mamumbo can have a use. I've seen it be useful as a helper. It's useful as a healer for Wish. Even if it has weaknesses, not all Pokemon are perfect and none of them should be. Hell, Charizard is still useful. I love that thing in Gen 1. But that's the point. Now let Shiny go.
It's funny. A lot of think of you as an ignorant or just don't understand the generations you hated. And they're right. But when you actually think, you speak your mind. Even if someone calls you out, you hold your ground and try to explain yourself. And even when you're wrong, you acknowledge it. You realize you're not perfect, yet you still do what you do. Let's end this game. Shiny, release the girl. You hit your low point for a while, and now you're trying to pick yourself up. Don't let something like this happen again.
I won't. At least Shiny's okay.
Alright. What about your top 15 lists for the Pokemon movies?
I will do that one again, but only if the viewers want me to. That list was only a few months old, and at most I find it mediocre. I will only remake that list if the viewers want me to. Alright guys, next up, top 7 stupidest animated controversies. Thank you all for watching.